Most men move through life looking for permission. Permission to speak up, permission to take the lead, permission to feel worthy. But here's the truth, most never realize the moment you begin seeking approval, you lose magnetism. You shift from being a leader to being a follower, from a presence to an option. Women can feel this. They may not be able to describe it, but they sense it. And when an older man walks into a room carrying certainty, not arrogance, but calm, grounded certainty, he stands out without trying. His energy says, I know who I am. I don't need your validation to be it. And that is rare. That is powerful. That makes women pause. You see, certainty is not about having all the answers. It's about being solid in your center. It's about moving through the world with clarity in your own value. When an older man has lived enough to realize that his worth isn't dictated by who claps for him, he begins to operate from a higher frequency. And it's this frequency that women respond to, especially women who are tired of emotionally immature, unstable men. Because it's not age that makes an older man attractive. It's wisdom, control, and a strong sense of direction. When you stop asking for approval, you naturally take the lead. And when you lead, you create a flow for others to follow. Most men don't understand the power of silence. They rush to fill space with words. They apologize too much, they explain too much, they overtalk. But certainty lives in quiet confidence. It doesn't scream, it doesn't beg, it doesn't push. It just is. When a man is certain, his eyes speak before his mouth does. His posture, his pace, his tone, everything about him says, I am not here to impress you. I am here because I belong. That subtle energy shift is what makes women feel intrigued, curious, and even a little destabilized. They lean in, not because you're trying, but because you're not. Older men have the advantage of experience. But that experience must be integrated. What does that mean? It means you've gone through failure, rejection, betrayal, and you've learned to alchemize it into resilience. When you've been to the bottom and come back stronger, your energy no longer carries desperation. You're not trying to prove anything, you're just being. And that being energy is what makes you powerful. Women go crazy for older men who are no longer performing because most people are performing, most are acting. But when you drop the mask and just show up in truth, unapologetically, you cut through the noise. Certainty doesn't mean being controlling or dominant. It means knowing your path and not straying from it just to be like. It means holding your standard, even if it costs you approval, especially if it costs you approval. That's when your power sharpens. That's when women realize, this man cannot be moved by charm or curves or compliments. He is anchored, he is self-led, and that is magnetic in ways youth, beauty, or status can never touch. When a man leads with certainty, he does not chase, he invites. He creates an environment that others want to be a part of, but he never begs them to stay. He allows attraction to be organic, not forced. This is a big one. Too many men try to convince women to choose them. They sell themselves like products. But a man who leads with certainty never sells himself. He simply shows up as the prize. He becomes the offer, not the applicant. And women feel the difference immediately. Certainty also brings emotional control. You don't explode. You don't shrink. You respond, not react. You hold space, not drama. That emotional stillness becomes deeply attractive because it's so rare. Most people are emotionally chaotic. But when an older man walks with stillness, when he remains calm in chaos, he becomes the grounding force that others crave. And women, especially feminine women, are drawn to masculine stability, not toxicity, not fake bravado, but deep, unwavering inner calm. A man with certainty sets the tone in every room. He doesn't need attention, yet he always gets it. Not because he's loud, but because he's present. Presence is not about volume. It's about being so fully rooted in yourself that others can't help but notice. It's about speaking less, but having more weight behind your words. It's about walking into a room and instantly shifting the energy, not because you're trying to dominate, but because your energy is grounded, authentic, and intentional. There's also this, when a man leads with certainty, he becomes immune to games. He doesn't play them, and he doesn't tolerate them. And women who are used to manipulating weak men get disarmed, not through aggression, but through indifference. The certainty of a self-led man doesn't leave room for emotional tug of war. He sees it, acknowledges it, and walks away. That act alone, of walking away without emotional turmoil, creates massive attraction. Because it shows strength. And strength, when combined with empathy, becomes irresistible. When you're certain your now has more power than other men's, Wes. You don't need to explain it, justify it, or decorate it. It stands on its own. And that kind of clarity commands respect. Older men who lead with certainty are not only attractive, they are unforgettable. Because in a world full of confusion, they become clarity. In a world full of noise, they become peace. And in a world full of followers, they remain leaders, not in title, but in essence. Most men allow their emotions to run the show. They wake up in the morning and let their mood dictate their day. If they feel tired, they move slowly. If they feel rejected, they spiral. If a woman gives them affection, they light up. If she withdraws, they collapse. This emotional roller coaster keeps them reactive, uncertain, and unstable. And whether they realize it or not, that instability repels the very connection they crave. Women might entertain it for a while, but they don't respect it. What truly captivates a woman, especially when it comes to older men, is a man who prioritizes his vision over his emotions. Vision is not just about goals or achievements. It's about clarity of direction. A man with vision knows where he's going regardless of how he feels. He doesn't wait to feel motivated before taking action. He doesn't need outside encouragement to validate his decisions. His life is not governed by emotional turbulence. It's guided by purpose. That internal compass makes him powerful. It allows him to move with consistency, even when life throws curveballs. And women feel deeply attracted to this kind of man because he represents something they can trust, stability rooted in mission, not mood. There's a certain calm intensity in a man who's driven by vision. He doesn't chase every high or collapse under every low. He allows emotion to pass through him, but he never lets it steer the wheel. His energy is focused. He understands that emotion is just data. It's information, not instruction. He can feel disappointment, anger, or even attraction and still remain centered. He doesn't need to be cold or robotic. In fact, the more emotionally intelligent he becomes, the more power he holds. Because emotional intelligence isn't about being less emotional. It's about becoming more aware and less reactive. A man who lives from vision doesn't just impress women, he creates a gravitational pull. Because most men are erratic, they're ambitious one day and defeated the next. They start projects with excitement but abandon them at the first sign of resistance. They promise consistency but deliver inconsistency. But when a woman meets a man who is consistent regardless of mood, she senses his value instantly. He doesn't need her attention to feel validated. He doesn't need her approval to stay focused. And that absence of emotional dependency is magnetic. This doesn't mean being emotionless. In fact, the opposite is true. A man who suppresses emotion becomes rigid, bitter, and controlling. But a man who acknowledges emotion without becoming enslaved by it, that man becomes rare. That man becomes powerful. He's able to process rejection without chasing. He's able to navigate attraction without losing focus. He can show love without losing boundaries. His life doesn't get detoured by every emotional trigger. And that emotional discipline is what sets him apart. Older men have the opportunity to develop this emotional mastery more than younger ones. With age comes experience. You've seen heartbreak, success, betrayal, disappointment. But if you don't integrate those experiences into a deeper sense of purpose, they just become emotional baggage. Vision turns pain into progress. It turns failure into wisdom. It turns loss into fuel. And when a man has that kind of inner transformation, he no longer needs to be emotionally handheld. He becomes the emotional container, not the emotional burden. And again, women feel this. They lean into it. Because it's safe, but it's also challenging in the best way. When your life is anchored in vision, you don't need to constantly explain yourself. You don't need to ask, "Is this okay with you?" Or, "Are you still interested?" You move forward with intention. You let your presence do the work. And the irony is, the less you chase approval, the more approval you receive. People, especially women, start to see you differently. You're no longer just another man hoping for attention. You're a man who's already moving forward with or without it. That creates curiosity. That creates respect. Another key part of vision is discipline. Not just discipline in actions, but discipline in thoughts. Most men are controlled by their thinking. One bad thought turns into a bad hour, then a bad day. But a man of vision watches his thoughts without being owned by them. He recognizes self-doubt, but he doesn't surrender to it. He sees fear, but he doesn't freeze. He notices attraction, but he doesn't abandon logic. Vision creates space between thought and action. That space is what separates leaders from followers, grounded men from reactive boys. Even in relationships, vision is essential. A man without vision will lose himself in a woman. He'll mold himself to her preferences, sacrifice his mission for her comfort, and eventually resent her for the very compromises he made. But a man with vision brings a life that's already full. He doesn't need her to complete him. He invites her to complement him. That shift changes the entire dynamic. He doesn't smother, he leads. And when a woman feels led, not controlled, but guided, she naturally opens. She relaxes, she trusts, because she senses that this man is going somewhere, and he knows exactly who he is on the way there. When you prioritize vision, you automatically raise your standards. You don't settle for low-quality relationships, conversations, or habits. You start making decisions that align with your mission, not your emotions. You stop saying yes to distraction. You stop tolerating inconsistency. You start showing up with focus. And women see that. They don't just hear it. They feel it in how you move, how you speak, and how you respond to pressure. You become a man who doesn't just talk about potential, he embodies it. And that embodiment is what shifts you from forgettable to unforgettable. Guilt is one of the most invisible and destructive emotional leashes a man can be pulled by, especially when he doesn't know it's happening. From a young age, many men are conditioned to seek approval, to be the nice guy, to avoid conflict at all costs. This conditioning creates a reflex, one where they say yes when they mean no, agree when they feel resistance, and give when they feel depleted. But the price of constantly pleasing others is personal emptiness. And the older a man gets, the more that emptiness begins to show in his energy, his posture, and even his relationships. Women may be attracted to his experience or age, but if they sense he's still driven by guilt, by the need to be accepted, respected, or liked at the cost of his own truth, they will lose respect and eventually interest. A man who says yes because he feels guilty is a man without inner freedom. He becomes a puppet pulled by emotions he doesn't control. He might feel noble in the moment, but over time, that need to please becomes exhausting. He becomes resentful. He feels like people take advantage of him, and they often do, not maliciously, but because he never establishes clear boundaries. And women especially can feel this. Some will test it, not out of cruelty, but because testing boundaries is how they assess leadership. If a man folds under pressure, if he agrees just to keep the peace, if he fears confrontation because he doesn't want to be seen as mean, then he loses the most essential masculine trait, respect. You cannot be respected if you are ruled by guilt. You can be pitied, you can be tolerated, you can even be loved, but not respected. And without respect, there is no genuine attraction. Women might be drawn in at first by your kindness, your emotional availability, your willingness to help. But once they see that those traits are rooted in guilt rather than grounded strength, they begin to pull back. They may not even know why. But the truth is, they are repelled by the lack of self-possession. Because a man who gives from guilt is not leading. He's surviving. He's managing emotions instead of setting direction. Older men who are truly attractive don't give from guilt. They give from overflow. They give because they choose to, not because they fear rejection or judgment. They are not afraid to say no. They are not afraid to walk away. They do not abandon their principles just to keep someone else comfortable. And this creates a deep internal power that is felt, not forced. When you refuse to be manipulated by guilt, you become unshakable. You may still feel guilt, because guilt is a normal human emotion, but you don't let it dictate your actions. You pause, you assess, and you act from clarity, not obligation. This doesn't mean you become cold, rude, or disconnected. Quite the opposite. You become more emotionally honest. You stop over-explaining your boundaries. You stop apologizing for your standards. You stop feeling bad for wanting what you want. That emotional honesty becomes a lighthouse to others. Women feel it, they might challenge it, but deep down they respect it. Because it shows strength. It shows maturity. It shows that you are no longer a boy looking for permission. You are a man owning his space. Men who are manipulated by guilt often end up in relationships where they are constantly walking on eggshells. They fear emotional withdrawal. They avoid expressing their real feelings. They suppress their needs because they don't want to rock the boat. But this creates long-term damage. It erodes confidence. It kills polarity. It turns passion into politeness. And eventually, both partners feel like strangers. But when a man stops letting guilt lead, he begins to reclaim his authentic voice. He speaks it, even if it's uncomfortable. He asserts his needs, even if they are not met. He expresses his desires, even if they're misunderstood. That kind of honesty might scare people, but it also commands respect. There's a unique peace in a man who no longer fears disapproval. He no longer needs everyone to like him. He no longer needs to play small to avoid being seen as intimidating. He no longer compromises his values for the sake of harmony. That peace is attractive because it's rare. Most people are still reacting to guilt, still driven by shame, still trying to undo childhood patterns in adult relationships. But when a man has done the inner work, when he recognizes guilt as a teacher rather than a dictator, he becomes untouchable. He can love without losing himself. He can give without feeling depleted. He can be compassionate without being controlled. And that balance is what makes him powerful. Women feel safe around this kind of man, not because he gives in to them, but because he gives truth to them. And truth, even when it's firm, is magnetic. Because it signals integrity, it signals leadership, it signals that you are no longer afraid of the consequences of being yourself. This shift, out of guilt and into grounded truth, is one of the most transformational moves an older man can make. It changes the way he walks, talks, listens, responds. It shifts the way he holds eye contact, the way he says no, the way he says less, and the way he stands alone. That kind of shift doesn't come from books or surface-level advice. It comes from deep internal confrontation, from facing the part of you that still wants to be liked more than you want to be free, and choosing freedom every single time. Every man experiences emotional pain. No one escapes it, whether it's rejection, betrayal, heartbreak, disappointment, shame, or deep regret. The emotional bruises of life leave marks. But what separates a man who becomes magnetic, who becomes grounded and powerful, from one who becomes bitter, lost, or passive, is what he does with that pain. Most men carry their emotional wounds like invisible chains. They drag them into every conversation, every relationship, every decision. They try to bury the pain, deny it, or distract themselves through validation, attention, or short-term highs. But that never works. It leaks out anyway, in the way they overreact, in the way they go silent, in the way they chase or cling or collapse when life pressures them. What older men often fail to realize is that emotional pain isn't the enemy. It's raw fuel. It's potential. It's energy waiting to be transmuted into power. But transmutation doesn't happen by accident. It's a conscious act. You don't heal by ignoring what happened. You heal by facing it, reframing it, and choosing to no longer be owned by it. That's what separates emotionally reactive men from emotionally powerful men. The reactive man lets his pain drive his story. The powerful man turns his pain into purpose. He uses it as evidence of his resilience, not proof of his weakness. And that shift in energy changes everything, especially how women respond to him. Women don't want perfection. They're not looking for a man who's never struggled or never fallen apart. What captivates them is a man who's been through hell and still walks tall. A man who has felt the sting of betrayal but didn't let it make him closed. A man who has faced deep disappointment but didn't abandon his ambition. A man who can hold grief in one hand and purpose in the other. That kind of emotional integration becomes magnetic. It radiates through his voice, his stillness, his boundaries, and his ability to stay present no matter what energy is thrown at him. Emotional transmutation means that instead of trying to escape the pain, you sit with it, you ask it questions, you learn its shape, you stop blaming others and start looking inward, not to shame yourself, but to understand yourself. You realize that every emotional trigger is a teacher. Every moment of discomfort is an invitation to rise. And as you accept that invitation, you begin to reclaim your power. You no longer fear being hurt because you know how to heal. You no longer avoid conflict because you're not afraid of confrontation. You no longer seek to be rescued because you've already rescued yourself. That energy, the energy of a man who has turned pain into power, is felt immediately. He doesn't have to say much. He doesn't have to prove anything. His presence says it all. When a man masters emotional transmutation, he no longer reacts from his wounds. He responds from his wisdom. He's not cold or indifferent, he's clear. He can feel deeply without falling apart. He can love passionately without losing himself. He can be vulnerable without being weak. That balance is what makes women feel safe. Not just physically safe, but emotionally safe. Because they know he won't collapse under pressure. He won't project his past onto the present. He won't use them as emotional bandages. And that emotional sovereignty is deeply rare and deeply attractive. A lot of older men become hardened over time. They've been through so much that they think the only way to protect themselves is to shut down. They become emotionally unavailable, disconnected, or cynical. But that's not strength, it's avoidance. True strength is staying open in a world that tried to close you. True strength is allowing yourself to feel without becoming controlled by those feelings. And the only way to do that is through transmutation. You take what was meant to break you and you break it down instead. You take the rejection, the failure, the betrayal, and you let it sharpen you. Not into a weapon, but into a tool for clarity, purpose, and connection. This process also rewires your energy. It changes the way you carry yourself. When pain is unprocessed, it creates tension in the body, chaos in the mind, and instability in relationships. But when it's transmuted, that same energy becomes grounding. You walk differently. You breathe more deeply. You speak with more precision. You listen with more presence. You no longer need to dominate conversations or prove your worth. You've already been to the edge and survived. That experience becomes your confidence. Not the loud, performative kind, but the quiet, unwavering kind that people feel before you even say a word. And here's the thing, transmutation doesn't mean pretending you're over everything. It means owning your journey. It means acknowledging your scars and letting them become part of your strength. Women respect a man who can say, yes, I've been hurt, and I'm still here, because that honesty reveals depth. It reveals emotional intelligence. It reveals a kind of maturity that can't be faked or bought. It has to be earned. And when a man has earned that depth, when he's done the internal work to metabolize his pain, he stops attracting chaos. He starts attracting peace. Not because he avoids conflict, but because he's no longer at war with himself. That inner alignment changes his relationships. He stops trying to fix women. He stops trying to be fixed by them. He meets them as equals, not as projects or saviors. He brings wholeness, not holes. He brings understanding, not expectation. He brings presence, not performance. And that shift doesn't just change his romantic life. It changes every aspect of his being. He becomes a man of weight, a man of presence, a man who no longer fears emotion because he has mastered it, not by suppressing it, but by transforming it. Comfort is the most seductive trap a man can fall into. It whispers lies that feel like truth. It tells you you've done enough, that you deserve to coast, that excellence can wait, that passion is overrated, that standards are negotiable. But the moment a man starts saying yes to comfort more often than he says yes to growth, he begins a slow decline into mediocrity. And what's worse, he doesn't always notice it happening. One yes to skipping the workout. One yes to tolerating disrespect. One yes to the wrong relationship. One yes to short-term pleasure over long-term purpose. These yeses stack up, and eventually they become the story of a man who had potential but chose ease over elevation. Women don't go crazy over comfort, seeking men. They go crazy over men who say no to excuses and yes to standards. A man with standards, true, unshakable, embodied standards, is rare, and rare is valuable. Standards aren't just about what you expect from others. They're about what you demand from yourself, how you eat, how you think, how you dress, how you move, how you speak, how you manage your time, how you treat your body, how you nurture your mind. Every area of your life is either honoring your standard or insulting it. And when you raise your standard and live by it, you send a signal to the world that you're not available for anything less than alignment. That energy is not only respected, it's deeply attractive. Most men have moments of motivation, but lack the discipline to back it up. They get inspired, they make declarations, they write down goals, but then life tests them. And instead of saying no to comfort, they fold. They tell themselves, I'll start tomorrow. It's not that big a deal. Or, at least I'm better than I used to be. But growth isn't found in comparison, It's found in consistency. The man who builds momentum by living his standards daily is the man who becomes impossible to ignore. His presence carries weight, not because he's shouting, but because he's aligned. You can feel when a man has done the work. His no carries conviction. His yes is earned, not given freely. He doesn't bend to pressure. He sets the pressure. Saying no to comfort requires a level of self-awareness most never cultivate. It means catching yourself in the small decisions, not just the big ones. Do you speak with integrity when it's inconvenient? Do you hold your routine when no one is watching? Do you stop scrolling when you know it's stealing your focus? These are the micro moments where standards are either enforced or abandoned. And women notice these things. They might not say it, but they feel it. They can sense when a man is living in alignment versus when he's performing to impress. Performance fades, alignment lasts. It's the man who says no to his lower self daily who becomes magnetic, who becomes the man others trust, admire, and are drawn toward. Older men especially fall into the trap of believing they've already done enough. They've worked, provided, endured. But the moment you believe you've arrived, you start to decay. A real man never stops refining himself. He understands that growth is a lifetime sport, that discipline isn't seasonal, it's foundational, and that passion, energy, and attraction don't diminish with age, they diminish with comfort. If you want to be desired, admired, and respected as you age, raise your standard as your years increase. Let your energy reflect elevation, not resignation. A man with high standards doesn't negotiate with mediocrity. He doesn't tolerate toxic people. He doesn't entertain distractions. He doesn't play small to make others comfortable. He walks away from what doesn't match his frequency, not with anger, but with clarity. That clarity becomes his compass, and clarity is power. When you know who you are and what you will and will not accept, your path becomes unshakable. That steadiness makes women feel something they can't always name, but they know they want to be around it. Not because you're perfect, but because you're principled. Your standards also determine your relationships. If you don't have standards, you'll attract chaos. You'll tolerate behavior that drains you. You'll make excuses for women who disrespect your time, your values, or your vision. But when your standards are high, you filter better. You stop being available to every pretty face and start becoming intentional about who you allow into your world. That selectiveness isn't arrogance. It's self-respect. And self-respect is one of the most attractive traits a man can embody. Saying no to comfort also means saying yes to challenge. Growth doesn't happen in easy environments. It happens when you stretch, when you push, when you lean into discomfort not as punishment, but as preparation. The gym, the cold shower, the hard conversation, the early morning. These aren't punishments. They're practice. They sharpen you. They prepare you for the moments where leadership is required. And leadership is never loud. True leadership lives in the man who leads himself. He doesn't need followers. He doesn't crave applause. He just moves differently. And that movement creates momentum. That momentum becomes mastery. Men who live by standard don't chase women. They attract them. Not through games, but through gravity. Their energy says, I know where I'm going. I'd love for you to join, but I'm going either way. That kind of certainty, that unshakable focus, is what makes a man unforgettable. Because in a world full of men who say yes to everything and stand for nothing, the man who says no with clarity becomes the one who stands out. Not because he's louder, but because he's solid, because he's real, because he's earned his place by refusing to lower the bar.